Welcome everyone to this third session of the Congility 2014 webinar series. My name is Julian Murfitt and I'll be hosting this webinar on attractive content for people and machines. Our presenter today is Caborn. Anne is a content strategist working with many different companies and has presented at Congility on several occasions. Over to you, Anne.
That's great, Julian. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everybody, for being here this afternoon. My topic is attractive content for people and machines. And the young woman in the center of the screen is Jessica Rabbit. I don't know whether you remember her from the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I've already said I'm not speaking at Congility this year because I felt very frustrated last year that I didn't manage to get to all the speakers I wanted to listen to because I was nervous about my presentation. So I'm enjoying the thought of being there this year and being able to listen to all the speakers. And so I said if anybody can remember the year in which this particular movie first came out, I'd and get it correctly, that you never know, if they catch me at the bar, I might even get them a drink in. The reason I like this is a quote from Jessica Rabbit, which is, "I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way." And I think as people involved one way or another with content which appears online, and that might mean that we're involved directly as agencies who are helping clients with online projects. It may be that we're involved as people within organizations because we create technical content. We may be involved in tech comms. We might be involved in marketing and other aspects of content generation. But we all, in some way, are responsible for the way content is drawn and the way it draws together our audiences. And therefore, a slip of the pen, the way you frame content online, can have a tremendous impact on the way it appears to people. And I have slowly over the last year or so been working on the concept of attractive content as a way of trying to define content of value to people and machines. It's my belief that particularly as the digital environment evolves, that content should be attractive to both humans and machines. And by machines, yes, I do mean primarily search engines. What tends to happen a lot of the time in my personal experience is you get a tension, a slightly fraught dynamic between what is seen as the demands of the search algorithms and the imperatives of customer relationships, the human, if you like, versus the formulaic. And the end result can be processes that become really rather clinical and very structured, and where there is a conflict between perhaps what people want to say and how it is deemed best to say it. And my starting point today, and indeed my starting point with clients, is that we need a more holistic approach and a much more imaginative and indeed intuitive way of holding the evolution of digital content in a human context. And today, hopefully, is going to be about giving you a little bit of advice from me and some tips and some examples of how I'm doing the attractive content thing. I suppose the next question is, well, why me? Well, I'm certainly no Jessica Rabbit, but over the years I have built up an understanding of the importance of different types of content from different types of sources and authors. I've worked in areas such as risk and governance. Risk and governance as they apply to organizations as a whole, so not just content risk and digital governance. I spent time in the UK Health Service working as a non-executive director, where I was directly responsible at a non-executive level for areas such as risk and governance, and became acutely aware of the issues involved, where you had sometimes very prescribed terminology which then had to be translated for wider audiences. I've also worked with the pharmaceutical industry, which has a whole language of its very own. I spent some time involved in the BBC iPlayer project right at the very beginning, and had some role to play in the development of the FAQs back in the days when view on demand was but a twinkle in the BBC's eye. And I'm also one of the authors of a book that was published by Wiley, which is Information Overload, an International Challenge for Professional Engineers and Technical Communicators, because I am particularly passionate about the need for and the ability of people in very technical areas to translate and control the translation of what they say for wider audiences. And for me that means attractive content. And what do I mean by attractive content? Well, I've come up with a little definition, which is based on a standard dictionary definition. Having the power to attract. And if we think about what we want with online content, isn't that the essence of it? We want to display online, whether that's via a website, via an email program, via a social media campaign, content in all its forms, but centered maybe around the written world, which is attractive to audiences. And the second definition, which I find particularly important, pleasing to the eye or mind, charming. And again, if you think about online content and its visual nature, isn't another ambition that we want it to be pleasing and charming? And I actually think, although these are soft measures, they are ones that we ought to shoot for. The nature of digital has been that actually what we've strived for in the recent past has not been the attractive, it has been the optimized. And that has obviously been very much led by the need to ensure that this content that we strive so hard to create is findable. And in terms of optimized, what do we mean by optimized? Well, again, yes, we mean optimized for search, but it's very interesting when you look at it as a definition: perfect, or as effective as possible, made the most of. And I know if I compare that to the previous definition, although I know I have to have optimized in mind, I think what I really want is attractive. And so it's all about the power of what we can create, about what we can draw, and what or who we are creating for. And that's my starting point. And at this stage, actually, because I don't see why I should do all the hard work, I'd like some help from you to set the scene for the way I want to approach this in this webinar. So I'm going to set the scene for the first of our polls. So if you want to familiarize yourself with how the poll is going to work, or think about that, this is the question that we're going to ask your opinion on, or the first of several questions we're going to ask your opinion on. So, all right, let's just park, and I do this a lot with clients, just park your professional skill set to one side for a moment. Thinking as a website user, if you read content that, or if you read content that struck you as having been created purely to attract search engines and improve a page's ranking, would that make you feel, and there'll be 3 choices in the poll, more positive towards a website or brand, less positive towards a website or brand, or no different? And Julian, at this stage, if I could ask you to seize the controls.
Actually, yeah, I've just launched it, and in fact it looks like I can launch it without taking control, so people should now see on their screen basically a summary of that question you posed, and you should be able to click on the one that you feel is appropriate and then submit it. And then once you've submitted, I'm seeing some submissions and it's coming through. In fact, it's very interactive. And then I can close the poll when things have settled down, while people are changing their minds by the looks of things. I can close the poll and then we can publish the results.
Yeah, so I was going to say what would probably be helpful for me, Julian, because you don't want to let me loose on the buttons, which is if you want to maybe let me know which was the most popular, the second most popular, and the least popular, that would be very helpful.
Lovely. So I'll close the poll now, and I will share the results, which I don't think Anne you can see, but let's see how we get on. So on the screen now, and if you can't see this, we've got 6% will be more positive towards that website. They must be the search engine optimization managers. And we have 65% feel less positive towards the website, and 29% actually would not have any feeling either way, so no difference.
Okay, well that's interesting. I want to ask you a second poll question, and then I want to maybe have a little discourse around the 2, and hopefully that will lead you into my my thinking. So okay, poll 1, congratulations everybody, you've acquitted yourself very well. Okay, I'm going to set the scene for the second poll at this stage. Do you think, again, personally, that you have become better at spotting copy that has been created purely or primarily with search in mind, less able to spot such copy, or no different? So, Julian, again, if you want to offer people
that's on the screen,
the option of voting on that one.
And the voting is underway.
Yay!
Yeah, one comment's been made by one of my team actually in here, is that actually it's not something they would normally consider, and that's probably not an unreasonable thing. In fact, we perhaps wouldn't want people to be thinking this, but this is the point of it, is to really see, for those professionals who are involved in content and therefore writing, maybe more open and probably more curious about the content they're reading, and hence the relevance of the poll from your point of view, Anne.
Yeah, yes, absolutely, and both the comment and your response to it, Julian, is absolutely spot on. There is also, I think, a difference between what we do intuitively, which we are not even aware of, and I might pick that up again after we've had the results of the second poll.
So here we go, and the results we have are better at spotting copy, 59%, quite well in the lead. Less able to spot such copy, 6%, and no different, no change, 35%.
Okay, thank you everybody for that. And I suppose to scoop them all up, the fact is, as users, our knowledge is always maturing, and Julian's colleague was quite right to say, well, this is not necessarily something that I would even consider. The fact is, it is my belief and my understanding that actually, even though we don't overtly think about content in this way simply by virtue of the fact that as users we are becoming increasingly digitally adept and skilled. We become better at discerning some of the tacit values in the content that we're being exposed to. And a prime example of this is the way, for example, traditional advertising, both print advertising and television advertising, has changed over the years. Television advertising didn't get more sophisticated simply because it wanted to. It got more sophisticated in response to audiences. In the olden days of black and white television, the wonderful white sheets and shirts that the housewife would hold up after she had washed them in the latest version of whatever brand of washing powder was being advertised. The sheet she would actually hold up on a black and white television was actually pale blue, because the advertising industry very quickly found out that pale blue looked whiter on black and white TV than white did. You couldn't get away with that now, even if there was black and white television. There are rules and regulations. You would be in danger of losing your audience if your audience found out that they were being manipulated that way. And interestingly enough, there's been a viral campaign on YouTube called First Kiss, which looks like a really interesting piece of realism. It turns out it may well be a brand advertising campaign. I'm slightly concerned about that in terms of how it can backfire on a brand. So I think the point about asking you to consider both of those questions is the way it actually makes you feel about the content you're reading. Maybe not overtly, but it does have an influence on the way we feel. And therefore, I think as generators of attractive content, one of the things that we need to constantly be aware of is the way the knowledge of our users and the skills of our users is maturing. But they're not the only ones, which brings me, I think, to my second point, which is it's not just our audiences which are growing up. The fact is that search, which for so long has been such a fundamental influence on content, is, in my opinion, growing up. Now, I want to state I am not a search expert as such. There are people out there who I rate extraordinarily highly, who understand the Google algorithm and its iterations in extraordinary detail, and who I work with very closely with on projects. I'm not for a moment saying that areas such as keywords and phrasing and so on and optimization are not essential tools. But what I think I'm discerning from a humanist point of view is changes in the development of the algorithm. And the metaphor which I am using for this with my clients, who are also not experts, is that Google is growing up. And so, again, I'd like to evolve that argument slightly more, but before doing so, I'd like you to answer another question for me, if you'd be so willing, which is, okay, if Google was a human being, in your personal opinion, what sort of age stage would they be at? So, is Google a child, a teenager, an adult, or an old person? Slightly funny question, but bear with me. So, Julian, do you want to take the controls again?
Yep, that's posted, and people are voting. 62%. If it stays low, I'll have to shout to wake people up. We're getting there. And that looks good. Okay, that's settled down at about 86%. So let's close the poll and see what the results are. And so we have number one, a child, 6%, a teenager, 67%, an adult, 28%, and an old person, 0%. So 67% is the big number. Adult, some people are feeling that Google has grown up already. It's 28%, and that's 6% on the end.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I'd like to state at this stage, what an intuitive bunch you are. But isn't it interesting, you know, we can spend so much time discussing in minute detail the implications of the various iterations of the algorithm. But at an intuitive level, if you discuss these things in sort of a humanist, attractive way, how we can reach what I think is a very sensible conclusion. And this is, for me, Google's recent past, which is, for me, and I suppose it has a lot to do with my practice, I seriously started to pay attention around the time that Panda, the Panda iteration of the Google algorithm. And I'm assuming most of you have some understanding, but basically Google, in terms of search, has an extraordinarily complicated, and at this stage all the SEO people start laughing, if you like, mathematical formula. Because Google is a machine, it has to use very sophisticated calculations to assess the content of the web and place it appropriately so it's findable, and it's findable not only in terms of what I'm seeking, but how relevant it is to what I'm seeking, the ranking. And there have been numerous iterations of the algorithm over the years. I'm never really sure when I talk to friends in search whether iterations such as Jagger and Big Daddy were really around, or whether they're just bluffing with me. But there have been numerous iterations of the search algorithm. Panda is the one I certainly felt everybody was talking about a lot. And I suppose for Panda, we're going back to the beginning of 2011. And for me, in terms of understanding what was happening, and indeed talking to my clients about it, I saw it very much as the initial growth spurt. What we'd had up until then was one of those very precocious, highly intelligent children that actually at dinner parties used to fill me with dread. You know, they're sort of 4-year-olds who'd bring you their science homework or whatever. And suddenly Panda started to look at things and saying, you know, that's not good enough. We're being gamed here. So one of the first examples of this was suddenly bloggers who updated their content regularly found Google was paying more attention. And there seemed to be an increasing emphasis on quality over quantity, which again I thought was very much about growing up. Suddenly, you know, your preteens discover there are more things to eat in life than a box of cheese and onion flavored Pringles, which I regarded as a huge plus. So beginning of Panda, the early stages of sort of growing up out of precocious, that late childhood stage. Then we came to, you know, Panda had they had 1 or 2 iterations, 3 or 4 iterations of Panda, and this seemed to be very much about Panda, the ability of the algorithm to find and notice human conceived content. And I know that some of the work that was being done was actually asking people to try and talk about what they liked and disliked about content, to try and build that human approach into the value judgments that the algorithm could make about things such as absence of bias and trust worthiness. And also, and again, I think this is very much a question of growing up, setting more store by what other people thought. So perhaps less the arrogance of youth and more asking other people what they thought of things. So the presence of user feedback fed into the algorithm. I also felt that the updates themselves seemed to become more thoughtful and phased, and there seemed to be more emphasis in explaining to wider audiences, not just the search specialists, what was important about them. Which then brings us on to the next stage, which is Penguin. Huge period of change. And again, I saw it very much as the teens. So yeah, there was some good stuff, getting taller, getting stronger, getting brighter, but it came with spots and smelly feet. But again, there was this feeling that it started to recognize authority and how good website content could command authority. It definitely started to learn more about different communities, and link quality became ever more important. And I know that some sites got themselves into a bit of a knot over having too many poor quality links, and there was actually a period where there was this question of sort of being link ambushed in terms of people finding that people were setting up erroneous links into their sites as a way of trying to demote them on Google. I've not really researched that particularly, but you know, Google was trying to find links that made sense, that were helpful. Being helpful was a good thing. Being helpful didn't mean you were a dweeb. And again, I think this is growing up. And then, of course, late teens, early adulthood, which brings us to the current iteration, which is Hummingbird. Now, the way Hummingbird is being spoken about more popularly is about the whole way that it's altering the search dynamic and the idea of being able to recognize and serve up results to search in a more human way. You know, asking the teenager, what would you like for supper, as opposed to eat chips now, eat chips later. They've also given some extremely helpful advice to content owners about greening content, which is the idea of restoring the value that can be found in older content. And there are ways of doing this. If you put in Google greening, you will find some very useful results. And again, I think that's a sign of growing up, isn't it? Just because stuff's old doesn't mean it's boring. So I'm going to ask you another question. This may relate to you directly because you work with a website. It may be that you're with an agency. But if you think about digital content that is under your control, online documentation, website, or whatever, if the digital content you control was a human being, would it be a child, a teenager, an adult, or an old person? And Julian, if you can work your magic.
Okay, that's on the screen now. We're getting fast voting. Settling down. Oh, we're nearly there. Any more? Got a few drop off there. Ah, there we are. Okay, let's close the poll there then, and we'll share that poll for everyone to see. And the child, 33%, teenager 44%, adult 11%, old person 11%. So a majority of people thinking they're in the teenage phase of their content.
Okay, I mean, I think, again, and the reason I like metaphors, one, it takes some of these discussions out of confrontational ones. And certainly if you're working within an organization or with clients, if you talk to people about, you know, how up to date things are, how sophisticated things are, sometimes people can get into a slightly defensive position. I think these debates deserve to be sort of taken out and broadened. What I find very interesting is that on this poll, about 33% of those who responded said they felt their website was more akin to its child phase. Interestingly enough, when you thought about where Google was in its development, only 6% of you felt it was in child phase. 44% of you said teenager. When you thought about Google, you said 67%. 67% of you said teenager. So I think I'm discerning potentially a slight disconnect between your digital maturity and Google's. And I think that's an interesting opportunity across organizations for some conversation in a very, very non-confrontational, non-accusatory way. And I find, you know, it's a useful device. But thank you. Can I thank all the children, teenagers, adults, and older people out there for their contribution. Okay. Final word about the algorithm, and I'm just very impressed I can do the algorithm in 5 slides or less. It's not all good news. I'm still getting to grips with the decision that Google has made very, very recently to switch across to encrypted searches. Those of you who analyze your own website's analytics may find that in some cases they're getting no returns on words. One of the things that we all did a lot was to see what users, what keywords users were using specifically to arrive at our website, and it's becoming increasingly hard to do that now. And to me, it's like the teenager who every now and again does a strop and slams the door in your face. I actually think this is potentially a good thing, because I think this is part of cutting the apron strings. I know that I am as guilty as anybody of going in and looking at the analytics and perhaps focusing too much on the keywords that are there and maybe forcing the issue. Before I move on, can I just ask you out there if you'd be so kind, only if you're aware of it, but in terms of the encrypted search issue, thus far, and we're really only talking about the last, couple of months, has it impacted on projects or campaigns or sites that you're associated with, i.e. making it harder to figure out what's going on with your users, or decide what you should be writing about or not writing about? Has it positively impacted on such projects in terms of freeing you from the chains of search and keywords, or made no difference? So again, if you'd be kind enough to respond for my benefit, I'd be very grateful. Julian, do you want to take that one on?
That's live, and voting has started. We're getting about 86% of you voting, which I would say is very good. That probably means that one or two.
I'm extremely grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
Again, one of the great things for me about this and going to things like Congility is getting an opportunity to talk to other people about what they've found and what they think. And that for me is more precious than rubies. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, any more? Got a bit of fallout. You voted? Yep. Okay. Let's close that. So it's at the moment we've got 27% are saying it's negative. So let's just close that and share. 27% negative impact, 9% is a positive impact, and 64% no difference.
Okay, interestingly. So even though this is very much being spoken about in terms of the problems it may pose, for a lot of you, it doesn't seem to be making any impact. Indeed, for some of you, for 9% of you, you seem to be able to use it positively. And hopefully we'll get an opportunity maybe at Congility to unpack that some more. But I think that's very interesting, because what you're telling me now is different, in my opinion, to the sort of feeling I'm getting when I'm reading the articles about the changes online. So, how am I taking this perspective and turning it into attractive content on the ground? Before I do that, just one quote. There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. And I think the reason why this next stage is so important to me is within the context of the organizations I'm working with, to get a shift in the way content is created and handled and then distributed online actually is not without effort, and it's not without blood and sometimes tears. And I think it's really important to recognize this. None of this is a sort of like wave the magic wand. So what am I actually doing these days to try and bring attractive content about? Well, you know, I start from the premise now that the pen is mightier than the algorithm, that the human now is in an extraordinary position to bend search to his or her will. So yes, good descriptions and titles, the things that we've come to do as part of being good for search, they remain important. But the content itself, I know it sounds a bit like an Eminem track, you know, keeping it real. If the copy, the content, the rich media doesn't seem human, if it looks too artificial, too imposed, too formulaic, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for humans, and if it's not working for humans these days, it will also not work for maturing search. So it's definitely about keeping it conversational, both in terms of the tone and in terms of giving opportunities for users themselves to feed back to you. It certainly, I think, is altering the shift between market research, content marketing, and the old skill of keyword research. I don't think that means that they're less important, but certainly in my own experience it means that more of these people are sitting around a single table rather than working in silos within organizations. And certainly SEO teams, whether they're in-house or agency-based, are coming in and working in a very, very different way. There was a death knell I felt towards the end of last year around, shall we say, some of the more poorly conceived link building techniques, which I think is part and parcel of this. Information rich content. You know, attractive content does have sequins and wavy hair, in my opinion. It's definitely about answering questions, and it's definitely about how-tos. And I'm very grateful to Noz, who I don't think is with us this afternoon, but is up to his eyeballs in Congility, for drawing my attention to this graph. And you can find the this graph in an article, the source is at the bottom there, Zoom spec, and it's looking at search terms. The blue line is for people who are using, who are searching things with the word who in. The red line, people searching for things with the word where in. So where will I find, I know, best bunch of flowers. Yellow, when. Green, what. Purple, how. Now this is tracking returns and interest over time, starting before or the early 2005 all the way up into 2013. Now just look at how who, where and when have increased slightly, but compare that to what and how in terms of the way people are searching. So to me, it's very obvious that attractive, by its very nature, has to answer what and how questions. So, in my opinion, you want attractive content, here's my tip. You want me to look nice? Erase the gun and take me down a cup size. If you want attractive content, you have to seize the pen. And I use the pen as a metaphor. It may well be video. It can also be visuals and graphs. But you have the ability to control the attractiveness of your content across your organization in a way that perhaps was less possible when it was much more search driven and a more formulaic search as that. So this to me is all about the organizational selfie. This is all about showing others as you see yourselves. It's about being an outward facing organization. Those of you who don't recognize the picture, this is Ellen DeGeneres' picture, her selfie from the Oscars. To me, it also means working without a net. A few years ago, I would never have said this, but write first and then apply the analysis. I don't mean write first, publish, then apply the analysis, but get your content generated from the heart. Get it generated from experience and knowledge and passion, and then see how it stacks up against the analytics, rather than trying to force perhaps TechCom to write in a certain way because traditional skills have told you that this is the most appropriate. So how am I achieving this? Well, the reality is I have a little basket of tricks, and I'm now going to show you my basket of tricks. Okay. So I will run things such as content engagement workshops. I will get people from across the organization, top down, to talk about what works on their website, what works in their social media campaign, what they like, what they don't like, and listen to each other speak, rather than just assuming that there are one or two departments in an organization who are primarily responsible for content generation or digital content generation. I have run language exchange workshops where people have basically talked about what's the difference between the way I talk when I'm talking to a fellow professional and what's the difference between the way I talk if I'm talking to a user, and the difference between talking to a user in a helpful way and talking to a user in a patronizing way. And these can be very lively and fun. Certainly it means listening to conversations all over the organization and not just assuming that the marketing messages are the core of the way content should be built. Content confidence builders, getting other people within the organization to speak up about what they think is right and wrong with the content, and developing what I call water cooler opportunities, which is, you know, even if it's breakfast meetings, why don't you come over to our side of the building and we'll stand the bacon butties. I also look for content champions. Content champions are very rarely heads of departments and heads of teams. Quite often they are people further down the pecking order who just get content and get digital content specifically. When I cast around and I spoke to other people about this, the other thing that I got from fellow professionals, which is, if you like, what's in their baskets, which is direct collaboration across silos, asking the question, how do you do something? Not, can you let me have the information? How would you break this down into bite-sized chunks as a manual for people who were configuring their new computer? And certainly reassessing the semantics of TechCom. It's not a sausage machine where the technical information goes in one end and the simple words of one syllable for the users come out the other. I think there needs to be much more of a dialogue between the various departments, and certainly monitor the ever maturing Google, because even as we speak, something has changed. We just don't know what it is yet. This is just a little trick that I sometimes use, which is I get people in a cross-organization way to bring in bits of content that they may be using, things like product data sheets, keyword lists, SEO instructions, marketing messages, and then I get them to put these bits of content on a scattergram. You can build this on a wall, you can do it with colored tape on the floor and make people actually stand in the segments. So there are two axes running from machine at the bottom to human at the top, semantic at one end and formulaic at the other. So one much more language driven, more colloquial, the other much more machine-like, formulaic, cold computer. And get them to put the various bits of content that their audiences, both internal and external, get them to put them into different parts of this graph. So, you know, the SEO might be very formulaic, and down the machine end, the marketing messages might be more semantic, and up the human side, in terms of which quadrant. Well, what could we do to make the keywords more effective in that semantic human quadrant? And actually, as a little bit of a tool, it tends to be fun, and it does quite a lot. Okay, I have spoken for far too long. I hope there might be some questions. If there are, I will do my best to answer them. I want to remind you about Congility. Hey, it's fun. And hopefully, if the machine didn't let me down, at some stage over me talking, my blog that goes with this webinar, and is, if you like, the narrative behind the slides, will have gone live. My fingers are crossed. Julian, back to you.
Thank you, Anne. Well, I hope everybody's enjoyed that, and I'm not seeing any questions as yet. Not uncommon with webinars to perhaps not have that many questions at this stage. But of course, I can remind you that we will be, we have recorded the session, and it will be posted on the website in the next few days, hopefully, or certainly early next week. And of course, you can send us emails either to information@congility.com or to myself at Mekon, which is julian.murfitt@mekon.com. And of course, you can send emails to Anne, and so we welcome any dialogue. We'll certainly be looking forward to seeing you, Anne, at Congility, and hopefully some of the people that have attended today will also be able to come along. So I think we'll see if any other questions. Now, I'm not seeing any questions coming up at the moment, so you've obviously completely blown them over. Lots of
oh, well, chance to be a fine thing, Julian. But yes, but thank you very much for everybody for taking part in the polls. That was very helpful to me, and hopefully you got something out of it too.
Super, and I can confirm that your blog has launched. We've just checked, so people will be able to go and see that as and when. So thank you very much for everyone joining. Appreciate your time in the day, and hope that you will take time to have a look at some of the other webinars we'll be running between now and June, when the conference is running. And of course, if you are interested in exploring, perhaps coming to the webinar or the workshops which we run the day before of the two main days, then obviously do reach out to us, and we can answer any of your questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Anne, again, and good day to the rest of you. The sun is shining in the UK, so let's make the most of it.